Well, you might not be reading your email, but somebody is, and they're not asking you for permission. To talk about the NSA case and all the rest, I want to introduce Denise Maes from the ACLU of Colorado. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me,
All right,
John.
let's do the story first of all. So this guy Snowden is a whistleblower, and either he is a whistleblower or he's a traitor. Either he's a criminal or he's a folk hero. Where does he land on this spectrum from the ACLU's point of view, or your point of view personally? Is this a guy who should be sent up the river, caught, captured, extradited, or is he somebody who we should be very grateful to?
You know, honestly, the ACLU nor I have a very strong opinion of that. I
Really?
think that he's disclosed some information. I'm sure to the extent that he has signed documents of confidentiality or what have you, I'm sure there are consequences. But I think it's a distraction. I think we've made his case and what's going to happen to him and whether Hong Kong is going to extradite him or not is really not the story. The story is the NSA.
But that story has finally taken the front page because of him. You know, and so I guess I have to wonder, inside the government, is there the ability for whistleblowers to come forward and say something is wrong here? You know, in private industry, a whistleblower comes forward and we praise him, but a whistleblower inside government comes out and we call him a traitor. Is he a traitor?
Well, you know, this goes back to, I mean, the Daniel Ellsberg days in the Pentagon Papers, right? I mean, we've seen this before, where there are the inside government that say, hey, I gotta wave the flag because this is bad for America. And I have no doubt that that was probably Snowden's intention here. And like I said, I mean, the problem is the law. You know, the Espionage Act seems to be what the federal government is going to rely on. I don't know enough about that particular act, but he seems to fit the elements. There seems to be a crime that he's committed pursuant to that. I don't know enough about it to say one way or the other, but I will say this, if I may, that, again, I think that's going to be the automatic government reaction, is to be overly vigilant about prosecution as a distraction to what the government is doing that it needs to be held accountable to.
All right, then let's jump on that, which is what the government is doing. Now, we've always had bad guys in society, and we've always had a way to spy on them, even domestically. And when we do that, traditionally, the good guys, the government, go to a judge and say to the judge, we want to look at this guy's phone records. We want to tap his phone lines. We want to read what's going in and out of him because we have suspicion that he's doing this. Here's the proof of the suspicion. We need enough to prove it or not. Will you give us a warrant?
Right.
After 9/11, tell me what I have right and what I have wrong here. After 9/11, in the rush to secure ourselves, we passed the Patriot Act, which seemed to open up a lot of wide doors. Not only do we have a lot less privacy, but we're now in a world where the internet is the ether that carries all of our messaging, all of our transactions, our phone calls, our data records, our financial records, our medical records, our communications, our videos, our holiday photographs. And now we don't have agents looking at people. We have machines looking at everything and using algorithms the way that Google does to say this is worth looking at or this is worth looking at. Or more importantly, if we want to look at you, we can just type your name in and start getting all that information. That is, the government has direct access to the servers of the most important telecommunication companies and technology companies, Google and Facebook and Microsoft and Apple and Verizon. They can look at whatever record they want anytime they want without a court order.
Well, apparently, I don't think it should have that sort of access. I think it is reading the Patriot Act, particularly Section 215, as giving them that sort of unfettered discretion to simply pry into people's personal lives without what you stated earlier, without suspicion, probable cause, a nexus between an actual individual and some wrongdoing. Instead, it's give me everything on everyone all the time. And I think that's definitely wrong. I think what we have here in our society, and I've said this a lot, that the law of privacy, the law that protects privacy, has not kept up with the technological advances that exist to invade it. And I think that there needs to be something done about that. The notion that we give up a lot of privacy by using the internet, I think that's a false statement. We might give up some, but we certainly shouldn't be asked to check in all of our privacy rights and constitutional liberties at the door.
Let me pull some analogies here. The United States mail is relatively sacred, that where you can't mess with the mail. It's a federal law, and so the feds can't grab your mail without some very particular guidelines. The internet is the new mail, but it has none of those protections. So they can do this. In 2007, the telecommunication companies pushed and got for an immunity act, basically, that said, hey, if you want direct access, we're going to get our butts sued. You need to protect us. And Congress and the president said, here you go. You've got protection. Right.
And even in the Patriot Act, as you know, there is a gag order on the telephone companies that if they receive an order from the federal government to turn over subscriber information, they're actually barred from telling their subscribers that they've been asked to do this. So that's actually in the Patriot Act as well.
This is between a customer and their company. And so
you and
I might have a relationship. You might be one of my customers, and I'm asked to give up information. I can't even tell you
that's
that
correct.
I've been asked to do that.
According to the Patriot Act, you are explicitly prohibited and barred from telling me, your customer, that you've been asked to turn over my telephone records to the government.
Let me try a couple points on you. There is oversight. We have a court, a special private secret court called the FISA court.
FISA, right.
FISA court. They are the ones that are able to give us this check and balance. It's not a court like we've usually had. It's a quiet court that's in the back.
Right.
And that's the check and balance, because there's no other way to work this.
I think calling it a checks and balances, it gives it a little bit too much emphasis or credit. First of all, who's on the FISA court? How is it? How are the members selected? There's everything about how the FISA court operates is secret. You can talk to your regular Title III federal district court judges, and they don't have a clue about what the process is to get on FISA. So it operates in a very secretive way, number one. Number two, when the government takes the request for an order to be able to serve on these telephone companies to get telephone information, there is no opposition. So it's not as if the court is making a decision between their arguments and these arguments. It's simply a request with no opposition whatsoever.
But in a regular court, if the police or the FBI come up to a judge and say, we want to do surveillance of his phone calls, we want to tap his lines, we want to put bugs in his home, there's nobody on the other side either.
No, but the standards are a little different, right? There has to be some reasonable suspicion that's particularly tied to that individual. Here, it's just an order for every 3 months, we're going to go to the FISA court and say, we want everybody's phone records for everything, for every call, for all time from your subscribers. There's nothing particularized about that request at all.
We live in a dangerous world, Denise. You don't seem to get this. We live in a bad world. Bad people are trying to hurt us. The government's job, right there in the Constitution, right in the Declaration of Independence, they protect our life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. And by doing this, this is what gives them the chatter they need. This gives them the information they need in real time, without the bureaucracy, to find terrorists, to stop terrorists. And if they tell us what they're doing, then they won't be able to be effective in doing it.
Well, I like that you said that the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution speak of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And there are rules of law for a reason, and that's why we have a Constitution. That's why we have a Fourth Amendment, is to protect liberty and to protect against the abuse of power, which is what I think is happening with this particular provision of the Patriot Act. Is it puts a lot of power into only into the executive branch of the government. And that is clearly a problem when it comes to a potential abuse of power.
Let's talk Fourth Amendment. Fourth Amendment keeps us from unreasonable search and seizures. We're secure in our our persons, our places, our papers, and our effects, which I would imagine we could say is when I'm on Google and I use Google Docs and I use Microsoft Word, those are my documents now, those are my papers and my effects. But they're not necessarily seizing them. They're not saying you've been charged with this and therefore they're taking it through due process. But they're saying, hey, we just have access through them. We're running an algorithm and we're pulling out people that use nasty words or seem suspicious or fit a certain profile. We're letting the computer do that. It's almost like a random sobriety checkpoint. You know, we're not picking on anybody. We're just pulling information out. We just have direct access if we need to.
Well, and actually a sobriety checkpoint has a lot more specificity to it, right? I mean, can you pass the sobriety test or not? Here, I have no idea what words the federal government is looking for. I have no idea what the algorithm looks like. And so to me, it seems like a pretty broad sweep of a heck of a lot of Americans' use of the telephone, of their cell phone. And I've heard the argument, it's just metadata, what's the big deal? Well, the fact is that metadata says a lot about you, and it provides a lot of personal information. Who you talk to, when you talk to them, for how long you talk to them. So, it'll give information on whether or not you called a suicide prevention office, whether you have some infidelities, what church you belong to, what political associations you are aligned with. All of that can be displayed through metadata. So there actually is a great deal of information. And to what particularized suspicion, I don't know. And John, at the end of the day, you're right. It might be a good process that has a good way of weeding certain things out and particularizing it. I don't know, because the system has never been transparent. I have no idea.
But in the same way, cops need a search warrant to come into my home if they wanted to see that.
Right.
They would catch a whole lot more bad guys if they didn't need a search warrant.
Exactly.
They would be able to come in and say, hey, we're just looking around in case we see something we don't like.
Exactly.
How is that different from what they're doing right now with my most personal data, my emails, my instant messages?
Well, I think you drew the distinction yourself in your question. They would need a warrant. And in this instance, they don't. They just go to a FISA court with a broad question, which seems to me to be a very rubber stamp process.
Listen a minute. The usual argument, hey, you got nothing to hide. Why do you care if some computer's looking at your stuff?
I've heard that, and I've heard that from our U.S. senators that you think would be actually staunch defenders of civil liberties. Again, I go back to the fact that the reason why we have rules of law, the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment, is to protect against an abuse of power. The fact of the matter is the Fourth Amendment wasn't just written to protect the innocent. It was written to protect all Americans, and it was written to protect all Americans against an abuse of power by the government. And here's a classic instance where we have a potential abuse of power by the federal government.
Denise, thank you so much. This
You're
story's
very
got
welcome.
legs. If you're not angry about this, then you're not paying attention. Tell a friend about the Independence Institute. We'll see you next week. Have a great one.